They said she was a hero before she even stepped foot in the bush. Private Adana Nwosu, 24, fresh out of military training, was the kind of soldier they put on recruitment posters. Proud, resilient, fearless. When the call came to deploy troops to a remote conflict zone in Nigeria's Middle Belt, she didn't flinch. She packed her gear, kissed her mother goodbye, and told her younger brother to watch over the house until she came back. She had no idea the bush had its own rules. The unit was assigned to a fading military outpost near a village called Ikalaba, buried deep in the dense, whispering wilderness of Benue State. Officially, they were there to contain armed insurgents, one of many flare-ups in the ongoing unrest. Unofficially, the locals had abandoned the village months ago. They left in a hurry, with pots still on fires and doors swinging open in the wind. Something else had moved in. The journey from the base to Ikalaba was punishing. 8 hours by armored truck over crumbling roads and narrow footpaths choked with thorny undergrowth. Each soldier in the unit had a different story about what they'd heard. Ghost militants, cannibal cults, witch trees that bled if you cut them. But Adana wasn't one for campfire tales. She believed in logic, in orders, in duty. The moment she arrived, the air changed. It was too still. The birds had stopped singing. Even the insects were quieter here. The trees leaned in close, their branches swaying when the wind was absent. The heat was suffocating, but Adana noticed how none of them seemed to sweat once they crossed into the village boundary. Private Chima, her bunkmate and closest friend from training, nudged her as they stepped off the truck. "Do you feel that?" he asked. She nodded slowly, gripping her rifle tighter. They set up camp at the center of the abandoned village. Clay huts with roofs collapsed from age surrounded them like silent watchers. The air smelled of old smoke and something sour, rotting. At first, the officers ordered patrols through the nearby terrain. But every soldier who went more than half a kilometer into the bush returned shaken, quiet, twitchy. One Corporal Malik stopped talking entirely. He was found 3 days later hanging from a tree with his mouth sewn shut. Adana didn't believe in curses, but she couldn't explain what she'd started to see at the edge of the tree line every night. A silhouette. Tall. Thin. Not human. Its limbs too long, its head tilted as if curious. It never moved when she looked directly at it, only when she blinked or looked away. She mentioned it to Chima once. He went quiet for a long time before finally whispering, "It watches all of us." They weren't allowed to leave. Command had gone silent after the first week. Radios only returned static, and satellite phones refused to connect. Captain Okachukwu insisted reinforcements would arrive, but his hands trembled whenever he held a map, eyes darting to the dark windows of the huts. Adana kept a journal to stay grounded. She wrote about drills, routines, the names of her unit. But pages started going missing. And sometimes, when she flipped back, the words weren't hers anymore. "It walks behind you. Don't sleep under the trees." It liked Chima's voice. On the 11th night, something screamed in the bush. It wasn't an animal. It sounded almost human, but stretched, mangled, as if someone had tried to imitate a scream without understanding how. The entire camp froze. Then they heard it again closer. A wet, gurgling screech that made her stomach knot. Adana clutched her rifle and scanned the trees. That was the night Private Boma vanished. She'd been on watch. Her boots were still by the perimeter wall, laces neatly tied. Her gun was propped up against a stone. But she was gone, no blood, no tracks, nothing. Captain Okachukwu ordered double shifts. No one slept. No one dared close their eyes. Those who tried had dreams of a voice whispering in the leaves. By the 13th day, the bush was no longer just watching. It was moving closer. Vines crept into the village overnight. Entire branches hung lower, thicker, as if bending in to listen. And the trees had faces now. Not literal ones. Just knots and shadows that seemed to align too perfectly when you stared long enough. Adana was no longer sure if she was losing her mind or seeing things clearly for the first time. One morning, Chima didn't report for duty. She found him in the hut they shared, sitting against the far wall, eyes glassy and unfocused. He held his dog tags in one hand and muttered to himself. They spoke to me. They said I could leave, but only if I brought you to them. Adana stepped back, rifle raised. Chima, what are you talking about? He looked at her then. Really looked at her. His face was wet with tears. I'm sorry, Adana. It doesn't want all of us. Just you. That night she ran. Through the trees. Past the shadows. Deeper into the bush. She didn't know what compelled her. Fear, betrayal, instinct. But she ran until the camp lights disappeared, and the only sounds were her ragged breath and the crunch of undergrowth beneath her boots. The forest was alive, not with animals, but with presence. Something breathed around her, close but invisible. She could feel it licking at the edges of her thoughts, pushing images into her mind. A pale face in a well, bones arranged in a circle, children's laughter echoing through hollow trees. When she finally collapsed, exhausted, the night swallowed her. She woke to find herself lying in a small clearing. Sunlight filtered through the canopy above, though it seemed weaker than it should be. There were carvings on the trees around her. Deep, deliberate marks like twisted tribal symbols, glowing faintly with a sickly green hue. And in the center of the clearing stood a statue. No, not a statue. A figure. It was tall, twice her height, with limbs too thin to hold its weight. Its face was blank, skin smooth and stretched like wax over bone. But it moved. Its head tilted toward her, and one long finger-like appendage beckoned. Adana tried to scream. Nothing came out. She turned to run, but the trees behind her had closed in. The path she'd used was gone, replaced by a wall of thorns and branches. Trapped. She backed away, rifle trembling in her hands. But it didn't follow. Instead it spoke. Not with a voice, but directly into her mind. You are not sent to serve your country. You were sent to feed the land. Her body froze. Every muscle locked. It stepped forward, and with each slow movement, she felt her memories unraveling. Her training, her family, her name. Then something changed. A sound. Distant but real. Gunfire. The spell shattered. She dropped to her knees, gasping, as the entity recoiled. The sound came again, closer this time. Chima's voice. Adana! This way! She scrambled to her feet and sprinted toward the sound, not looking back. Branches tore at her arms, roots tried to trip her, but she kept running. At last, she burst through a thicket into a small clearing where Chima waited, wide-eyed, holding a flare. The creature didn't follow. They both collapsed to the ground, breathless. I thought I'd lost you, he said, shaking. I shouldn't have said those things. It got inside me. Adana stared into the trees. No, she whispered. It chose me. And it's not done. By the time the sun had fully risen, Adana and Chima were back at the camp. But it didn't feel like the same place anymore. The huts looked older, more weathered than they had yesterday. The trees stood closer. Even the air seemed heavier, like it had thickened in their absence. And no one else was there. Their unit was gone. Rifles lay abandoned beside smoldering fires. Backpacks were torn open, scattered like someone had been searching for something, desperately. A trail of boot prints led toward the edge of the bush, where the trees seemed to pulse with anticipation. Chima walked in slow circles, muttering to himself. This isn't right. We were only gone for hours. They couldn't have just vanished. Adana crouched by one of the rifles. It still held a warm barrel. They left in a hurry, she said. But they left armed. That means something chased them. Chima stared at her, his face drawn and pale. Or something called them. Adana didn't answer. She didn't want to give power to the thought already growing in her head. The whispering had started again, barely audible just beneath the wind. Her name, stretched long and thin, like someone trying to remember how to speak it. Adana. She stood quickly, her hands trembling. We need to get out. Now. We find the river. Follow it until we reach the highway or some other village. But what if the others are out there? Chima asked. We can't just leave them. Adana looked toward the bush. Something deep in those shadows was smiling. She didn't need to see it to know. They're not coming back, Chima. You know it. He didn't argue again. They packed what little gear remained. 2 rifles, 1 flare, a nearly empty water canteen, and a compass that spun without direction. As they moved, the bush swallowed them whole. The deeper they went, the more the world bent around them. Trees grew at impossible angles. Leaves shimmered with a dull silver hue. The ground pulsed beneath their boots, like it had a heartbeat of its own. It was no longer a forest. It was something ancient. A body they were walking through. The river, when they finally found it, was black. Not murky or dirty black like oil or ink. It didn't move, and no insects hovered above it. The air here was cold, unnaturally so. Adana knelt to test the water, but stopped inches from touching it. She could see her reflection in it, staring back unmoving. And behind her reflection was something else. A second face. White. Hollow-eyed. Smiling. She stumbled back with a scream, rifle raised. But there was nothing there. Only the slow, soundless river and its waiting stillness. Chima grabbed her shoulder, pulling her away. We can't stay here. It doesn't want us here yet. Yet, she snapped, chest heaving. What do you mean yet? He looked ashamed. It told me. Back in the hut. When it was inside my head. It doesn't kill quickly. It watches. It waits. It unravels you first. Adana didn't want to hear more. She needed to think, to move, to get away from the grip of the trees tightening around her soul. They followed the river's curve for hours. Time moved strangely. Sometimes the sun shifted in the sky too fast, other times not at all. Hunger gnawed at them, but nothing edible grew here. Even the birds avoided this stretch of forest. Occasionally they would see signs, carved into tree trunks, spiraling glyphs like coiled worms or open mouths. At one point, they passed a tree with something hanging from it. Dog tags. Adana reached up, heart pounding. She recognized them. Private bomas. And beneath them, bound in roots that pulsed like veins, lay a human jawbone, still bloodied. But no skull. No body. Just a single boot print in the moss, leading further inward. It wasn't just their unit that had been lured. Others had come before. Soldiers, perhaps. Or villagers who tried to fight what lived here. The deeper they went, the more the forest began to change them. Adana heard voices when she closed her eyes. Her mother's voice. Her brother's laughter. Sometimes she smelled her childhood home. The scent of palm oil and rain on a hot tin roof. It was a trick. She knew it. But still she ached for it. She tried not to show it. But Chima saw the cracks forming. Don't listen to it, he said softly. One night as they huddled beneath a tree that dripped sap like tears. It's learning you. That's how it gets in. Don't give it anything to hold. Adana nodded. But in her mind something whispered. He will betray you. Like before. That night she dreamed. She was back at base, clean uniform. The sounds of training echoing across the compound. But everything was off. The sky was too red. The other soldiers had no eyes. And Captain Okachukwu walked past her with a noose dragging behind him like a shadow. At the far end of the compound stood the creature. Watching. Not moving. Just there. It didn't need to move. Its presence pressed against her bones. And it spoke. You cannot run. This land remembers. This land owns. She woke to find herself alone. Chima was gone. Panic took hold. She screamed his name, circled the area, checked the trees. Then she saw the drag marks in the dirt. Feet. He had been pulled. The tracks led away from the river, deeper into a darker section of the woods where even the air refused to breathe. She followed. Every step closer pulled her into something older than time. The trees here were petrified, black and twisted with no leaves. Bones hung from branches like fruit. Human bones, animal bones, child-sized bones. Then she saw him. Chima. Tied upright to a tree trunk with vines that moved as if alive. His eyes were wide, lips trembling. I'm sorry, he whispered. I couldn't fight it. From behind the tree stepped a woman. But no, not a woman. The shape was feminine, draped in tattered soldier's fatigues. Nigerian military uniform, though warped and too long at the arms. Her face was a white mask. Blank. Featureless. Except for a mouth carved into the surface, stretching from ear to ear. She turned her head sideways and her body creaked. Then she spoke. Welcome home, Adana. The voice wasn't hers. It was hers. Adana's. Exactly. Every inflection. Every breath. Adana raised her rifle, heart racing. Let him go. The creature moved closer. Its head tilted. The voice changed. Now it was her mother's. I'm proud of you, my daughter. Then her brother's voice. Come home. You've served enough. Then Chima's voice. You were never supposed to come here. Adana screamed and fired. The bullet passed through the figure, shattering the mask into dust, but behind it the body remained. No blood. No recoil. Just waiting. The vines around Chima loosened. He fell forward, gasping. Adana rushed to him, dragging him up. We need to go. Now. But the woods behind them were already shifting. The way back to the river was gone, replaced by a path paved in bones and flickering torches. A corridor through the woods, lined with figures watching silently from between the trees. Soldiers, villagers, children, all with blank, expressionless masks. Chima coughed, holding his side. It's not letting us go. We'll make it, Adana said. We didn't come this far to die here. The path beckoned, glowing softly beneath their feet. As they began to walk it, hand in hand, a voice drifted from behind them. One last whisper from the heart of the forest. You serve your country still. You serve by bleeding into its roots. They didn't look back. But they both knew. They were walking into the heart of something that had never known death. Only hunger. The bone path whispered beneath their boots. Each step echoed, not through the trees but through them. Like the forest had learned how to vibrate through blood and bone, not sound. The air grew warmer with every step. Humid, rotten with the smell of wet bark and decay. And all around them, the masked figures remained still. Watching. They didn't breathe. They didn't blink. They simply waited. Adana gripped Chima's wrist tightly, afraid that if she let go, the forest would take him again. He staggered beside her, weakened but moving. His eyes glazed like he was drifting in and out of this world. Stay awake, she hissed. Don't fall asleep. Don't listen to them. I can't, he muttered. It's calling again. They reached the end of the path. It opened into a clearing, wide, circular, surrounded by trees that arched inward like cathedral pillars. At the center was a massive ant mound, taller than any termite structure Adana had seen. But this wasn't natural. It was carved, shaped like a throne, with symbols burned into its sides. It pulsed, and beside it stood her again, the woman in the soldier's uniform. But this time, she had Adana's face. Perfect. Flawless. Like a mirror's reflection stepping outside its frame. Chima fell to his knees moaning. Blood trickled from his ears. Adana aimed her rifle again, but it didn't matter. She knew bullets wouldn't work here. Not anymore. The forest wasn't a place. It was a being. And she was standing inside its heart. You've returned, the mimic said, smiling with her lips. That means you're ready. Adana took a step forward. Ready for what? To remember. The trees around them shuddered. A wind rose from the earth, not the sky. And in that wind came voices. Screams. Gunfire. A baby crying. Her own voice yelling orders. Then silence. Adana clutched her head. Her mind was being pulled apart like cotton in the teeth of something ancient. Visions poured in. She saw herself during an old mission, an off-the-books assignment from 2 years ago, deep in a disputed region, where tribal lands had been illegally seized. Her squad had been ordered to clear a village suspected of housing rebels. But there were no rebels. Just families. They'd set fire to homes, pushed terrified villagers into the bush. The elders begged. The children screamed. Adana remembered none of this. Not until now. Her superiors had buried it. Told them it was a drill gone wrong. That the forest had consumed the village, and no one had survived. They'd left behind no record. But the forest remembered. You bled into the roots, said the mimic. Your guilt is part of this land now. No, Adana gasped. We didn't know. But you followed, it whispered. You obeyed. You burned. And when they cried, you turned away. Chima groaned beside her, now curled on the ground. They haunt me too, he said. Their hands always reaching. The forest had not lured them randomly. It had summoned its own. Punishment was only part of it. The deeper purpose was assimilation. You can still serve, the mimic said. Serve truly. Give yourself. Feed the land what you owe. Let it wear you, so your memory lives in truth. Adana looked into her own face, held by something that had never known humanity. And if I refuse? The mimic turned her head slowly. Then you'll forget again. Until the forest brings you back. Again. And again. And again. The throne pulsed brighter, wet and alive. And from the trees came the masks. They floated weightless, dozens of them, then hundreds. Each bore the face of someone once lost to the forest. Some were soldiers. Some were children. Some were half familiar. Each mask hovered toward her, a silent demand. Adana grabbed Chima, dragging him upright. We run. But the trees were too close now. The path of bones was gone. And the figures, the watchers, stepped forward. The clearing closed around them like a jaw. No more running, the mimic said. Then something massive stirred beneath the throne. The ground split. From beneath the mound rose a form. Not humanoid. Not beast. It was shaped like a woman but made of clay, vines and bone. Thousands of small hands clung to its body like barnacles. Faces stretched from its limbs, whispering prayers and screams and lullabies all at once. It had no eyes. Only a gaping mouth, open wide enough to swallow the sky. The forest's true self. The god of the forgotten. The mother of guilt. Adana fired blindly, but the bullets vanished into its skin like raindrops on sand. The being stepped forward, and with each movement, the ground cracked with buried bones. Her mouth opened farther, and inside, Adana saw herself, trapped and screaming in 1,000 variations, living out every forgotten sin in loops. She saw Chima's face among them weeping. They were already there. You were born here, the creature rumbled. You were shaped here. Let me wear you. The mimic stepped behind them, hands outstretched. Adana didn't cry. She didn't scream. She took Chima's hand and whispered, if we're already dead, then dying again won't matter. Chima looked at her through blood-streaked eyes. What are you saying? She pulled the last flare from her pack. This thing feeds on memory, she said. On guilt. But fire cleanses. And with a scream, she lit the flare and hurled it at the mound. The fire caught immediately. The throne burst into flames, screaming. Not cracking, not sizzling, screaming. The mimic shrieked as her borrowed face melted. The massive creature flailed, backing into the burning throne. Flames erupted from her mouth like she was vomiting every stolen soul. The masks fell from the air like leaves. The watchers collapsed. The forest howled. Adana grabbed Chima, hauling him back through the inferno. Somewhere beyond the fire, a path opened. Not the bone path, but one lined in ash. Trees bent away. The forest recoiled. And through the smoke, a break appeared in the tree-lined sunlight. Real sunlight. They didn't question it. They ran. Branches clawed at them. Thorns tore skin. But they ran until the light devoured the shadows and the screams faded into distant echoes. They collapsed in a field, gasping under the weight of silence. Real birds chirped. Real wind blew. The bush lay behind them, quiet again. Chima wept. Adana stared into the blue sky, unsure if it was real or another trick. But for the first time in days, the voices were gone. They had escaped. For now. There was something wrong with the sun. It shone too brightly over the grassland. Too clean. Too still. Not a single breeze stirred the tall stalks. No bird darted across the sky. No insects buzzed. The world beyond the bush looked normal, but something in it had been hollowed out. Adana lay there for hours. Her arm curled around Chima as he drifted in and out of exhausted sleep. She didn't trust the open space around them. It reminded her of a stage too exposed. Like something was watching, waiting for them to forget. Because the forest didn't just take bodies. It waited for silence. Waited for the moment survivors stopped speaking of what they'd seen. So it could reclaim them without resistance. By late afternoon, she forced them both to their feet. Bruised, bloodied and raw. They stumbled down a footpath toward what looked like an abandoned ranger station in the distance. The building leaned at a tired angle. Half of its roof was missing. But it was real. Concrete and rust and broken glass. They stepped inside. The room was cluttered with old maps, worn boots, and a rusted shortwave radio. The walls were scratched. Some looked like claw marks. Others were fingernails. Someone had tried to leave behind messages. Don't listen to the drums. The trees remember. IT walks in uniform. Adana turned the radio knob. Nothing but static. Then a voice crackled through, brief and garbled. Me in report. Delta Command, who's alive? She gripped the mic. This is Corporal Adana Okoye. ID 453 to 99 Delta. We need evac. Location unknown, possible ranger station. 2 survivors. There was silence. Then the voice returned clearer. Adana? Corporal Okoye? You've been missing. For 3 weeks. Her heart skipped. 3 weeks. No, she whispered. That's impossible. It's only been 5 days. The voice on the other end hesitated. Hold your position. We're sending a team. Don't move. Do you copy? Adana said nothing, because she heard it again. From the distance. Drums. Not the celebratory kind. These were slow, hollow, deep as thunder, as if the earth had a heartbeat, and it had remembered them. Chima pressed his hands over his ears. They said we were gone, he muttered. That we never made it in. What does that mean? Adana didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the corner of the room where an old photograph hung. Dust-covered, water-damaged. She wiped it with her sleeve. It showed 5 people, 3 men, 2 women, in ranger uniforms smiling proudly. The date at the bottom read 1982. But behind them, in the tree line, a faint shape. A figure. Dressed in army green. Face blurred. Watching. She blinked. The image rippled. In the corner of the room, something whispered. Soft. Slippery. Like wet vines sliding across stone. They weren't alone anymore. Chima stumbled back. It followed us, he whispered. We never escaped. We just crossed into its other face. Adana checked her weapon. 1 bullet. She handed it to Chima. Don't use it unless you have to, she said. What about you? She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped outside, scanning the horizon. There was no wind. No noise. But the shadows under the trees across the field had thickened. Lengthened. A man walked out of them. No, not a man. A soldier. His skin was cracked. Covered in moss. Eyes white with cataracts but glowing from behind. His uniform matched Adana's perfectly. Even the name patch, Okoye. And behind him, others stepped out. A dozen. Maybe more. All wearing the same face. All in uniform. All with that mask of familiarity. Like the forest had tried to rebuild her memory, but kept getting it almost right. Chima gasped. Adana, they look like you. The first soldier, her twin, raised its hand and pointed to the ground. The earth trembled, and from the soil rose roots. Black and wet. Writhing like fingers reaching for ankles. Adana pulled Chima inside. Upstairs. Now. They scrambled up the creaking steps as the roots slithered through the floorboards below. The house groaned. Wood snapped. One of the figures outside opened its mouth and spoke, but not in any human tongue. It was a language of the bush. Of bone. Of rot. Chima pressed his back against the far wall, gripping the pistol. They're not just copies, he muttered. They're their empty skins. They want to wear us. The roof split with a sharp crack. A root punched through the ceiling, lashing at Adana's shoulder. She screamed, grabbed the fire axe from the wall and swung. The root hissed, then retreated. We need to burn it down, she said. The whole place. We die here, or everything does. But the evac. She looked at him. Chima. That voice on the radio, are you sure it was real? He hesitated. It sounded real. Adana lit a flare. Then she smashed open the fuel drum in the corner. The scent of diesel flooded the room. Below them the floorboards buckled. Roots curled through the gaps, testing, tasting. And from outside came a rising chant. The same rhythm from the bush. The watchers had returned. But now they wore her face. Go, she said. Out the window. Run west. I'm not leaving. That's an order. He stared at her. She kissed his forehead, pressed the flare into his hand. Wait 30 seconds. Then drop it. She turned, headed downstairs. Her boots sank into the rising roots. The door burst inward, and the figures entered, dozens of Adanas, all smiling the same twisted smile. She met them with fire. And upstairs, through tears, Chima counted. 30 seconds. He dropped the flare. The ranger station exploded into a tower of flame. The forest screamed. And for a moment the world held its breath. When Chima looked back, all that remained was ash. And silence. The government trucks arrived in the morning. Their tires crunched through the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust as soldiers in camouflage stepped out. carrying rifles and the weight of suspicion. Behind them, a convoy of official vehicles parked in a neat line. They were here to clean up, to investigate the missing personnel, and to bury whatever it was that had caused the disappearance. Chima stood at the edge of the still-smoking ranger station, his hands trembling. His mind was hazy, dreamlike, as if the fire had stolen all but the fragments of his memory. He had to fight to keep his eyes from darting to the trees, because he could feel them, watching, the familiar weight of 1,000 eyes from the bush that had followed him back. There was no one else in sight. The soldiers spread out, securing the perimeter, while officers in uniforms that smelled of authority and politics strolled toward Chima. He stood taller than he had felt in days, trying to appear calm, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. He could still hear the echoes of the forest, feel the pulse of the earth beneath him. Corporal Chima Okafor, one of the officers called, holding out a clipboard. "We need your statement." Chima blinked. His name, said by another person, it sounded alien. He could hardly recall when he'd been given that identity. His mind swam. Adana, had she really existed? Was any of it real? Or had the forest simply shaped the world to match its will? Chima. The officer waved a hand in front of his face. "Are you with us?" He nodded, his throat dry. "I'm here," he rasped. "I don't know where to start." Another officer, a woman with hard eyes and an air of calm authority, stepped forward. "We need to know everything. What happened in there?" Chima swallowed, eyes shifting nervously to the horizon. He wanted to speak the truth. The whole truth. But something in him, a voice that wasn't his, whispered, "Don't tell them. Don't trust them." He spoke anyway. "We were sent in to investigate the disappearance of the first team. What we found," he paused, rubbing his face. The words felt foreign, as though they belonged to someone else. "What we found wasn't human anymore. It wasn't just a jungle. It was a living thing. The trees, the soil, the air itself. It remembered what had happened there. And it tried to make us forget what we did." The officers exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. They didn't believe him. They never would. This place was too far from civilization for any of them to understand the truth of what had happened. Even he wasn't sure he fully understood it. "You're telling us that a forest is somehow responsible for the deaths of your team?" one officer asked, incredulous. Chima's stomach churned. He could feel the echo of those trees, of the strange watchers in the forest. He could still see Adana's face, her twin that had been dressed in the same soldier's uniform, smiling that grotesque smile. "Do you think I'm lying?" he spat, his voice shaking with sudden anger. "Do you think I wanted this? You think this is a story I'm making up? You think you can just sweep it all under the rug?" The officers didn't say anything. They just stared at him with cold, distant eyes. "I don't care if you believe me," Chima continued, his voice low and trembling. "But I've seen what it can do. I've seen it wear you down until you forget yourself, until you become the forest. So you'd better listen to me, or you'll all end up like the rest of them." A tall figure in the distance caught his eye, a soldier dressed in full gear, standing apart from the group, looking at him. No one else seemed to notice the man, but Chima couldn't look away. The soldier's face, it was Adana's. The eyes. The expression. "Adana," Chima whispered, his voice breaking. The officer beside him turned sharply. "What did you say?" But when Chima looked back, the soldier was gone. For the briefest moment, the world seemed to stop. He blinked, trying to gather his thoughts. But the officer pressed on, his questions becoming more insistent, more pressing. Yet Chima could barely hear him anymore. He saw it again. A glimmer in the tree line. Another face. Then another. Dozens of faces. Dozens of Adanas, their features twisted and burnt. Their eyes hollow and empty. Some wore his own face. Some wore faces he didn't recognize. Faces of the dead. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But there they were, watching him, waiting for him to turn away. He didn't. He could still hear the sound of the drums, echoing from the bush. They weren't done with him yet. Not by a long shot. Chima didn't say anything else. He simply turned, walking away from the group, away from the soldiers who were still talking, still questioning. And he knew deep in his gut that it was already too late. The forest had already begun to grow back. It was already stretching its roots toward them. He would never leave. Not really.